to really go up through them and stand there in front of the stones. You just have to, you can't imagine us doing it today, much less people that are supposed to be less advanced than we are. So it raises the question, and this is the question that most anthropologists, paleontologists, archaeologists, at least academically, want to avoid is, well, could it be explained by an inclusion of the fallen angels, the Nephilim? Well, that gets into the whole concept of God, angels, demons, and that sort of thing, and the academic community is just going to run away from it. And, so that's why we're out there. We're out there saying, well, look, you guys won't look into it? We will.
Right.
Because we're not afraid of the spiritual implications. In fact, we believe the spiritual implications. So are these descendants of Nephilim? That's what we're trying to find out. Are we stupid for looking? No.
Well, I kind of felt the same way when I went to Egypt for the first time and stood next to the pyramids, Joe. And I looked up that thing, the Great Pyramid at Giza, and then I climbed inside into the king's chamber in the interior. I was baffled. I've seen it in videos and pictures, plenty of times. But when you're next to the thing, it's mind-blowing. And I can't imagine being over there in Peru and seeing these elongated skulls and all this evidence. And it just makes you wonder, was there an incursion of these Nephilim at some time in the past? I know you're gearing up to go back over with LA and back over to Peru. What are your hopes, Joe, for this trip as far as your part goes? And do you think is there a possibility of finding a complete intact body with the femur that we can compare with the skull?
Well, there's indications of that from some of the contacts that we have there. They feel like that's very, very possible. Of course, we've dug together. It takes a long time to dig something up. You can bulldoze it, but that's not scientific. So do something correctly. It takes time, and you may just find a very common, ordinary-looking specimen. It'll still be really interesting, but it won't be, if it isn't a giant or it doesn't have odd features, you've done something worthwhile. But yeah, I think there's a really good potential if all the details and the situation with the authorities and all that can be worked out. I think there's a very good chance of finding an intact person. Now, my thing would be, of course, to have another really good, unique specimen to mold and then bring back here and pass around to different doctors and various scientists, have them take a good look at it, because you can only have one skull. But to get a really good reproduction, it's the next best thing. What I would like to see, if we could find something, is I'd like to collect the samples of the soil that is around them, especially underneath the bodies, if there is a body, underneath the bones, so we can find some undisturbed soil, and then analyze that for salt content, pollen, to see if it was a different environment they lived in. See, is it exactly the same as today, or is it different? You can only tell that if you look for pollen and different elements in there. That, I think, is very doable and should be done. If we can find one that has intact hair, it doesn't take much hair to have someone look at it, chemically, determine if there's heavy metals. Were they on a diet of fish food like crabs and lobsters and things like that, which would maybe put mercury into their system? Or were they strictly whale eaters? Those things can be determined from the hair. Were they ingesting poisons? Were they ingesting drugs? You're in the medical profession. That stuff there's a record of that in your bones, your teeth, and your hair. I think we could get that. I think we get a lot of information. And should there be a mummy with intact stomach contents, possibly, that can tell you a lot, just a lot. The teeth with the microliths, there's labs in, I believe, in Austin that can, if you haven't done anything to the teeth, you haven't disturbed them, go in there and find these little patterns that plants arrange with silica. And those are sometimes left still intact on animal teeth, human teeth, and you can get these under high microscope and see, oh, well, they were eating a grape, or they were eating a yucca plant. Here's the little microlith, and they have this pattern in there. That could be very important. And then the shape of the skull, X-ray. If it's a mummy, they can be X-rayed. If it's not, if the skull has already just been basically cleaned, then that'd be probably a good one to mold. And now that we know more about what we're looking for, I would mold it a little bit differently with that in mind. So, there's information we didn't even know was there, that if you knew, if you're molding something, you always want to make the split marks where you have to separate the mold. You want to put them in the least important area, and where, there'll be no damage to information. Well, now that we know what this stuff is, I would design a different mold. So that's what I'm hoping to get. If this particular individual, let's say, was wrapped in cotton, which is typical of the Peruvians, you don't just rip it off, tear it off, see what's in there. That cotton tells you a story. Itself tells you a story, and there's pollen in all those layers. There'll be pollen in the person's clothes, in their hair. That again would tell you a tremendous amount. So that's the sort of things I'm hoping that we'll get a chance to do if we can make all the arrangements.
Joe, you wrote a book, Giants Against Evolution, that just came out not too long ago. It's available at mountblanco.com, MT Blanco, MTBLANCO, mountblanco.com. And Joe, there's a famous picture of you on the internet standing next to a huge 47-inch femur. There's a story behind that. You have a lot of examples in your book of giants found all over, especially in North America. Tell us a little bit about your research in your book, what you found.
Well, like anybody, I'm fascinated by the unusual and the odd. And knowing that the Bible talks about giants, I've always had that in my mind, that there were giants. There was Goliath, and then you wonder over the years, I wonder if they have ever found the bones of them. Well, I began to see news articles 20, 25 years ago, so I started collecting them. And when I decided to write a book, just worlds of information started coming in. And this, about 1997, a professor down in Florida at a school there sent me a newsletter, copy of a newsletter called It's About Time. And in it, one of the people writing a letter to the editor, said he was a road construction engineer in Egypt, Homs, and Uransora. And in their putting in roads there in Egypt and Turkey and various places like that, they would bulldoze through a hill, and it would turn out to be a burial mound instead of a hill. And up would come these giant bones of giant men, and probably stone sarcophagi, limestone or granite caskets. But he mentioned the bones, and he said, we measured, there were several. We measured one femur, which was 120 centimeters, which is about 47 inches long. And he said, would you do me a sculpture of this so I can show my students how big it was? So I did, sent him a cast of it, made a cast for myself, projected the drawing of a skeleton of a human up to fit that femur, and I was shocked that, it goes up to 14, 15 feet tall, which was the size of King Og. So was he telling the truth? I think so. I don't think the man had any reason to make the story up. I think it was a true story. And you ask, well, what happened to the bones? Well, what happens to bones today in America, in our high-tech society, when they hit a skeleton out there putting in a road, it gets busted up. Whoever finds it, grabs it, throws the bones that haven't fallen apart in the back seat of the pickup, and maybe they call the university, maybe they can't. The bones fall apart because they don't know how to keep them together, and it's not their job. So you can imagine in the 1950s the same way. They hit those bones over there, and the ones that remain intact probably they dug down a little bit and said, oh my gosh, look at this, so they measured it. Uh, I'm sure it's a true story. I think there are giants like that being found all over the Middle East and other parts of the world. They have been for hundreds of years. And the reports, if you start looking, the reports are just everywhere in old newspapers, books, and so on. What I try to do with the book, I take a little different perspective on everything. But for one, I'm an artist. Well, first, I'm a Christian. I just look at things differently. Two, I'm an artist. And three, I've been involved in paleontology for so long that I just look at things and I know things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So one of the questions you have to answer with the evolutionists or the atheists, the naysayers, who say, well, those are all just mastodon skeletons. They're big and they look like human skeletons, and there's no such thing as giants, because finding a giant man would mess up the story of the 4-foot monkey up to the 6-foot tall man. To put a 20-foot tall man or a 15-foot tall man there with extra fingers and toes and teeth, that would mess up that story, so they don't want that. So the average person goes, well, I don't know, you're right. Yeah, here's a mastodon skeleton. Even the teeth look human. Yeah, that's true. Their feet look very much like a human. Maybe it's true. Maybe they're just all mastodons. Well, if you know bones, and I've worked on a lot of mastodon skulls and mammoth skulls and elephant skulls, and I work on human skulls. Human skulls are hollow. Mammoth and mastodon and elephant skulls are not hollow. Their brain is hollow, and their brain is about the size of a human skull, okay? So if you read an old report that says they found a giant man and his head would hold 30 gallons of corn, you know they're not talking about a mastodon, because the biggest mastodons in the world, which come from Greece and England, the lower long tuskers, you know that their skull isn't any bigger than a human head, which wouldn't even hold a gallon of corn. So they're not talking about a mastodon. Mastodon skulls are mostly just full of holes and sinuses. So it's things like that, like, you know, were they rhinoceroses? Well, if you know your rhino bones, you can tell no. Even an uneducated person would know that these are not rhino bones.
Well, and you've been able to look at these and study these, Joe, because of your knowledge in bones and osteology, and you know the difference. But and you can also tell the fake ones. There's pictures around the internet from
Exactly.
so-called giants from Greece that are totally fake. We know they're fake, but that doesn't discount the whole theory of the giants. And actually, what I believe is actually more than a theory. It's there's a lot of evidence, and you document that evidence in your book, Giants Against Evolution. And I think it's just a fascinating book, Joe, because you have put a lot of research and time into this book. I would highly recommend. I have a personal copy of the book, and it is just a fascinating read. If you're interested in this, it's just a resource for you, because this will show you some of these stories that has been forgotten in the annals of time in history, and that has been buried and suppressed. Joe, you and I went out to Rockwall, Texas, just over a year ago, and there's a strange phenomenon under the feet of the locals there, which actually gets its name from this ancient rock wall that's underneath the people's feet. And back in the 1850s, they found this ancient rock wall and supposed evidence for archaeological remains of giants. You and I went over there, and just recently they were able to excavate part of the wall. What do you know about rock wall, and tell us what you think about it?
Well, if it's a hoax, well, there are two stories really: the rock wall, and then the story of they're finding a giant skull, which would have been probably I'm guessing maybe 20 or 30 inches long and maybe 1.5 feet wide from what they described. But there's that. Then there's this room they apparently dug into with black marble columns and a giant box and a huge cauldron full of human bones and huge bird that scared them all to death, iron doors, and so on. There's that story, and a lot of people said,